Determining the value of a business using future value and present value. In this example, we're going to take a look at the possibility if you owned a business that was growing and you knew what that growth rate was, that you could predict its future value. And here's an example. We have a hair salon today is estimated to have a value of $20,000. Its present value. We, through some analysis, have found that the estimated growth is 10% per year, compounded annually over the next 3 years. That's the prediction. And this prediction would be determined by some analysis on what the business has done so far. The question is asking us, what is the future value? We will use our compound interest table to calculate the future value. Here we have it already spelled out for us, and the 1.331 came from the table that can be found on page 382, or a compound interest table where we're working with an I, interest rate per compounding period would be 10% divided by 1, which is annually, which doesn't change it, it's 10%, and N, the number of compounding periods, annually is once per year for 3 years, so we're looking for the intersection on our compound interest or future value table of N of 3 intersecting with an I of 10%. You should find that that is the 1.331, and so that 3 years from now this business will have a value of $26,620 should it continue along with this estimated growth. So here's the summary. Today it's worth $20,000. It's projected to grow, and we just calculated what that will be 3 years from now. We asked the question, if you sell now, what would you do with the money? If we sold out, we're not going to sell it for $20,000, its current value, but perhaps we can't quite sell it for the amount of its projected value, but somewhere in between the two. So to help us decide what the asking price is because of this potential growth here, we take a look at what we would do with the cash today. And here's a scenario that we'll take a look at to illustrate this. We're going to invest the money, and we've found that we can invest it in an account that is compounded quarterly, paying 8% during these 3 years. So what we need to determine is, what is the present value, in other words, the asking price of this business, that will give us the same value as if we had kept the business over the 3 years. So we want to determine the present value of this future value given this specifics of an investment. So here's a recap of what we have. Today the business is worth $20,000. If we kept the business in 3 years, we would have a value of $26,620. If we sold it today, we would invest that money at 8% compounded quarterly. So the question being asked is, what is the price we should sell our business so that we end up with a future value of $26,620 as though we had kept the business ourselves 3 years from now with this 8% compounded quarterly investment. So we're looking for a present value. And the present value, to calculate that, we need to know our I, our interest rate per compounding period. 8% compounded quarterly. We will take 8% divided by 4 to give us an I value of 2%. We need to calculate our N, how many compounding periods there are. It's compounded quarterly, that's 4 times per year for the 3 years that this money will be in this account, which means we have an N of 12. The present value, which equates to the asking price, will then be plugged into our present value table, and these two values, the I of the 2% column and the N of 12 in the row intersect at 0.78849. To find our asking price, which translates into present value, we will take our future value, as though we held on to the business, multiply it by the value from the table, and this gives us our asking price for the business today. It's slightly higher than the business is worth, but the buyer, knowing that if this is sound analysis showing that this business is going to grow 10% in the next 3 years, they know that even though they're paying a little more than it's worth today, and almost $1,000 more, it will grow in the next 3 years to over almost $27,000. So this asking price isn't out of line, and you, the seller, should you get this asking price, invested in an account paying 8% compounded quarterly, will garner the same value as though you had kept the business yourself. Let's look at another one. John figures his bike shop is worth $88,000 if sold today, and that it will grow in value 8% per year compounded annually for the next 6 years. If he sells the business, the funds will be invested at 5% compounded semi-annually. So very similar to the last example. We have two things that they're asking us. They want us to find the future value of the shop, or the compound amount, and then what asking or selling price should he insist on at this time if he sells the business. In other words, the present value of that value of his business down the road. So let's take a look at solving this. For A, we're looking for future value. And we have to be careful which percentage that we use. We are going to calculate the future value of his shop. So we are going to use the growth factor for the business. Based on some analytics, they've determined it will grow 8% per year compounded annually. So we're going to use our compound interest or future value table. We need to know our I, so we take 8% divided by the compound periods per year. It's annually, so it's 1. We have an I of 8%. N, how many compounding periods will there be? 6 years compounded annually. We have 6 times 1 per year is 6. In your compound interest table or the future value table, those values of I and N intersect at this multiplier. We times it by the present value of the business, $88,000, to show a projection that this business will have a value 6 years from now of $139,644.56. We're ready to move on to part B. What price should he insist on at this time if he sells the business? We're going to treat this as though he sold it today and invested this money, and this is where the second part of this problem gives us the information that we'll use for this calculation. We want to determine today's price, translates into present value, as though that money was invested at 5% compounded semi-annually and grows to the future value of the business as though he had kept the business and not sold it. We need to calculate our I for our present value table, 5% divided by its compounding frequency. Semi-annually means 2, so we have an I value of 2.5. The number of compounding periods, semi-annually is twice a year, but this cash sale today is invested in this account paying 5% compounded annually, so it will be growing to this future value as though we own the business. So we take 6 times 2, an N value of 12. On the present value table, we will look up for the intersection of this I, 2.5%, and this N of 12, which should be 0.7436356. Multiply it by the future value that this business will grow to in 6 years. The result is this number, almost $104,000. That is the present value of this business should John hang on to it, and will act as the asking price for the business, so that the new owner will have a business, if it continues growing at this rate, money worth that. And John, with the sale of his business today and this 5% compounded semi-annually account, will also have the same amount as though he had owned or kept the business himself and didn't sell it.